Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Shelley Burke Otto. I work with the Transition Improvement Grant as a transition specialist, and I'll let Alicia introduce herself here again.
Hello, everyone. It's great to be together. I am Alicia Reinhard. I'm the Transition and Graduation Consultant in the Office of Continuous Improvement at the Department of Public Instruction. I also have the privilege of serving as the Transition Improvement Grant Director, and looking forward to being with you all today and Shelley to talk about beyond age 18 programming and those common questions and practices that come up.
We wanted to come together today and work with everyone and put a webinar together just around some of the things that have been coming up now that the guidance has been out for some time. The objectives for this hour together, we're just going to do a quick review of the Beyond 18 programming guidance, talk about the structure and the foundation of the Beyond 18 time period. We're also going to then get into some things that have the most common questions that have been coming in to TIG and DPI around the guidance since it's been out. Some of them are some technical components of structuring this time period. Also talk about some programming design challenges, and then we'll allow some time at the end of this for some questions. Wanted to just start out by highlighting where you can find the guidance and do a little show you how that's housed, what that looks like. We do have the guidance housed on the TIG website. If you don't have an account with us, it's really important to create one and get on the listserv. It can be very valuable. We don't inundate your email box with emails, but when we do, it's usually very helpful things such as a new resource that may be coming out, a grant, or it could be information on the PTP application if it's not working well, if there's going to be updates. So it's helpful to have that listserv. Then you can go to the website and access the guidance. I'm just going to hop over quick and show you on the website, we do have tabs that run across. And when you hover on the transition planning tab, there is a drop down and you can drop down to the transition programming beyond age 18. The transition programming beyond age 18 is actually housed as a Google site. So this is what the actual guidance looks like, and it has the index on the left side. If there's a little caret, that just means there's a drop down. So one important or a piece that often people go to is the policy in the beginning, the state and federal requirements. It kind of talks through the structure and the foundation of what beyond age 18 programming should look like. And then a piece that some directors and districts like to start with is all of that policy written out is broken down into kind of a chart of what this time period should and should not be. So sometimes that's helpful, but just know that this is where the guidance is housed as a Google site and what it looks like a little bit. We also have a full PDF version of the whole Google site. So if that's an easier way for you to digest the information, or if you're wanting to print that off to share with teams and families, there is that as well. Let me just get back over into presentation mode here. There we go. To just ground ourselves as we get going in the presentation, of what the foundation of this time period looks like. The guidance really goes over just as a little reminder that really Beyond 18 programming is available for any student with an IEP. It's not based on a disability category. It is an IEP team decision. It's not a decision made by one individual person or school district or administrator, parent, family, outside agency. It's a whole team decision to decide if 18 beyond is something that is needed. It's still our hope that students are graduating with their 4-year cohort, but sometimes students need a little more support in this time period, and that's all purely individualized. the whole design of the programming really rests on the student's IEP and PTP. It's not a continuation of the traditional school day. It looks very different. So it's not a continuation of 8 to 3, Monday through Friday. I mean, there may be some times that students may need something that looks a little bit more like that, but for the most part, it's going to look vastly different and be more community based. Um, Focusing on what their post-secondary employment, where in the community are they working on bridging to belong to, and all that's a piece that I think sometimes we forget about. We talk about jobs and going on to school, but it's just as important that all students have a place that they belong to in the community. So it's not a repeat of coursework and a continuation of that traditional day. But I do want to point out, and it is on this slide, that it may be possible that students are taking a class or two within the high school, especially if it's something that's helped supporting them to get to their goal. So, for example, if it's a student that's going to work within the culinary field, they may be taking some advanced culinary classes to help get them to that goal. Or perhaps they're working on some credit work that is helping them meet graduation requirements. But for the most part, they're working on something differently. They're not taking ceramics for the fifth time. And then this really important piece is that really who's around the table in that IEP team in transition work is really changes. But we're starting to work more with outside agencies. There's community resources and support. So that shifts quite a bit as we move into, especially it shifts throughout the student's time period and working in transition, but especially in beyond 18 programming, there's always going to be adjustments as we explore and work on working towards a student's schedule. It's not exclusively a school support and funded. It may start out more so in the beginning of beyond 18 programming, but then they're slowly going to pull back as the supports that come into place for will be supporting the student when they exit school. I once had a transition coordinator, I think this was last year, bring up that they like to say the very last day of the student's day at school with the school district is going to mirror their very first day when they exit. And I love that analogy. It should start to mirror what the student's day, week, schedule is going to look like when they exit school. And so, therefore, it needs to be very meaningful and relevant to the student as to what they're going to be doing, and they're going to be in an environment with their same age peers. Gradual release is really important during this time period, and sometimes just explaining that to teams is helpful as you move into this time period. It's incredibly important to start conversations early, though, and not be waiting until their junior, senior year, or turning 18. The more that you can talk about transition and often and frequently, starting right in middle school and even earlier, the more helpful it is to be able for all teams of the IEP team to be able to see that vision and that there are options for upon graduation. Um, Gradual release is really important because where we're starting to really collaborate, but what we're wanting to do is to make sure that the student doesn't fall off that proverbial cliff when they graduate. So if they are, it again links back to the importance that it's not a continuation of the traditional school day, that they're not going to school Monday through Friday, 8 to 3. Um, Although that is a safety net often for many of us, right, at school and in families, it's not helping the student to gradually release the supports from the district and then get supports into place that they'll need when they exit school. So it's really important time period to have the school supporting and then help linking connections and relationships and figuring out what supports are needed and where and what's available in your county and gradually handing that off. And like when you hand off a baton for a time period, you're both hanging on to that baton and then one's gradually letting go. So that's really kind of the perfect analogy for this time period. And just remembering that this shifts, it can look different each semester, and who's sitting around the table. There may be new people coming in, and release and transition happens differently for each student and family. So do keep that in mind.
Thanks, Shelley. I'm going to spend a couple minutes honing in on program versus programming. And the reason we kind of phrase it this way is one of the most common questions that I get in my role and TIG gets in their interactions with educators and school districts is how do we create a really effective transition program? And our first response is that it's not a program, it's individualized programming. When we think of this phase of education as a program, it puts structures and limits around what we're providing to students, and it is a slippery slope to easily take away that individualized nature of special education. Special education is always individualized, and that is especially important when we're designing beyond age 18 programming for students with IEPs. And we want to make sure that that programming is specifically designed to that individual student's disability related needs and the supports and services and instruction that they need to continue to make progress and get ready for when they leave school, whatever that may be for them. Another important way that we're setting up effective programming for students at this time is making sure that IEP teams are really starting to reflect on what does FAPE mean now for this student. So FAPE, for those who might be unfamiliar, means a free and appropriate public education. It really is the core of providing special education to any student with an IEP. And as students are entering beyond age 18, and that time in their education, oftentimes what it means for that student to be receiving FAPE shifts a little bit for a couple reasons. One, we're not, just like Shelley mentioned, we're not mirroring that school day that they have been having up until this point. We're really honing in on what are the services, supports, and instruction that this student needs to be prepared to reach those post-secondary goals when they leave school. The other reason that that fate may have shifted is now that students' same age peers are no longer learning and socializing and working in the same environments necessarily than they were prior to age 18. And so we need to think about how we're creating learning opportunities and experiences for students who are staying in school longer to continue to learn alongside their same age peers. Thus, the should about community-based programming in natural environments. Creating this individualized nature for every single student is really complicated. We're not trying to diminish the fact that this is not a hard service to provide to students, especially when you're trying to really create this individualized set of services. So it is important that IEP teams and teachers and different partners around the school, not only the school, but also the community and outside agencies, are thinking about like services and instruction. So if you know that you're going to have 3 students who are going to have a need for instruction in travel trainings, for example, to be able to navigate their community when they leave school, it would benefit the school district to think about how can those students receive that instruction together. We're not saying that every single student has to be in an individual class. This is where your schedule in a transition program becomes so important because you're using that schedule to really drive those like services and instruction while also maintaining that individualized nature of programming for students. And the way to support that schedule and getting that structure in place for you to be able to provide that to students, you need a strong network of partners behind you as a school district. So we need to have strong relationships with our outside agencies like DVR and long-term care. We need to have strong partnerships with our business partners in the community and other community organizations who can really almost act as ingredients for building strong individualized programming because every year student needs are going to shift and your classes shift. And so it's important to have that network behind you to be able to be responsive to those needs of your students and create a structure and a class that works for not only the school district to deliver it, but for students to receive FAPE and have that individualized programming that they need.
We had to add in this meme. It just is so fitting for Beyond 18 programming and really probably all, all special education coordinating and scheduling. And it is messy and it is hard to create those schedules in the beginning of the year, especially because you do need a strong coordination of schedules to be able to maximize staff. Um, and I just had to chuckle because when I was teaching, I had paper all over the walls in pencil, trying to find transportation and making it all kind of somehow magically fit. Um, One thing we wanted to discuss here is a little bit about the gray. I think this period it's gray, and that's exactly how it should be because it is an individualized time. Student schedules and everything looks different. So it does bring about more questions and of how to do this. Because there isn't one set curriculum or program that we could just hand over to you and say, do this. It's pulling from multiple areas, and because of that individualized programming, it's so differently. One of the questions that has kind of come in, especially as of late, is asking if students with that have maybe some real complex needs, maybe it's some medical health needs or a unique situation, if they're applicable for Beyond 18 programming. Um, if they're not immediately going on to post-secondary training or school or an employment, are they able to stay? And absolutely, this is a great time to really help support students. And remember, it's for all students with an IEP. But I think sometimes we think employment, going on to college, that's, kind of what we're helping support. But just a reminder that we did put in actually just into the guidance another student sample schedule of a student with some complex health needs. Um, and this is a student that wasn't immediately going on to employment or working in a job. They were working more on vocational skills. They also had a lot of different health needs. So it was a perfect time. And this is was a real student to me. So that's how I'm speaking to it. But it would, the IEP team decided that this was a perfect time because the student had a lot of different needs, and they were going to be going into a community, working with a provider on classes and some type of day services. But the student had a lot of different things going on. And so we pulled together the school nurse and all of the support staff and anyone working with the student within the school and built the Beyond 18 schedule that helps support the student moving to a different environment. And that involved the staff from the community provider coming into the school and observing, getting to know the student, working with the staff so that the staff could share how to do certain things. There were a lot of healthcare needs. The school nurse was involved in this training, and then ultimately gradually moving to their site. So, a lot of the Beyond 18 time is also just helping to build those relationships and connections so that when you're no longer there, they have somebody in place for them. So just remembering that. And then this whole time is just a different, connecting and communicating. There's more communication that often needs to be done during this time period. We'll talk in other slides, but a lot of districts we're noticing are having a lot of are really utilizing like a transition meeting outside of the IEP time because this is just a time to informally to come together. It can be set by the parents at a time and place that works for them, and everyone working with the student because you have so many different outside agencies that may or may have some different requirements of physically seeing them every month. Can come together and just share how's it going? Do we need to make adjustments? That type of thing. And just remember that each school and community and county is really unique. So the more that you can come together, I was always learning about a new resource that maybe perhaps a church offered, or, there's just so many different things to try and stay on top of.
All right, so we're going to shift gears into talking through some of the most common questions or challenges that you all might experience to implementing individualized beyond 18 programming. And so we put together this common list of some of the really technical things that are unique to supporting students in this phase of their education. So making sure that those student schedules are individualized, but they also need to fit within the structure of a school day. So it's not expected of a school district to be providing support to a student after 4 p.m., for example, because that's their individual need. That's where those outside agency partners can really be a part of braiding together and providing service in a joint manner. Staffing can also be a challenge when we are trying to provide such specific and individualized instruction. It can be a challenge given the current resource constraints that our school districts are operating under to make sure that we have appropriate staffing for everyone. So it's really important to have that strong schedule. We all chuckled at that meme that Shelley shared before, but I think anyone who's been in a transition coordinator role, I too, just like Shelley, used to spend hours and hours on making sure our schedule was solid and that we were meeting all those individual needs. And then that schedule changed every day because somebody might be sick or somebody's off of work. Someone has an extra thing to go to, like a job interview. It's important that, as staff, we're making sure that we are getting those schedules under wraps. We understand the strengths and expertise of the staff working in our program so that we can ideally match to what the day is going to look like. The other thing I always recommend to schools when they're working on creating uh, finding solutions for staffing challenges is to get creative. Just because there's a need for a student doesn't necessarily mean that that need can't be has to be fulfilled by the special education teacher. Think about how your paraprofessionals can support structures and reteaching. Think about how other partners might be able to braid services even during the school day. Could DVR be providing some instruction and that would free up a teacher to be doing something else with another student? There's a lot of other staff members in the building who can be a part of providing and community at that who could be a part of providing support to students. We could find natural supports on a job from a coworker. When I was a transition coordinator, we often found the way that we were able as a staff to get together and have conversations when we needed to have those critical conversations where leaned on our student services office. We asked them to come down and do something with our classroom so that we could all be on the same page about supporting a new behavior, for example, or something. So those are just some examples of getting creative. Transportation is always a challenge for everybody in the world of supporting a person with a disability because often folks are non-drivers that we're supporting in this time. And so, um, you know, transportation can be provided by multiple partners. So this is another opportunity to braid funding and supports for transportation. School could maybe provide a ride to a job. Could DVR provide the ride home? For the student. So thinking about how we're braiding those things together. And I'll mention, and we'll reference it a little later in the Transition Action Guide resource, there's nothing that precludes an outside agency, once a student has been found eligible, to provide services to that student. We just cannot be duplicating services. So there is an expectation that long-term care or DVR, whatever the other agency outside of school might be a part of supporting that student, they can provide things in that student's day. We just need to make sure that we're having a collaborative conversation about how those services are being braided together. Another common question that we get is environmental codes. And so basically the same formula and way that you determine environmental codes is the same for students in beyond 18. The guidance applies, but one thing that I always remind IEP teams about is that if students are learning in community environments that are maybe more inclusive than the environments that they were in parts of their day or all of their day in 9th through 12th grade, that environmental code may shift. So if a student's working in an integrated job in a competitive integrated employment opportunity, that would be considered a quote unquote a general education environment, a regular education environment. And so really think about breaking down a student's day and what environments that they're learning in, because we're often shifting that programming to be more community-based in this phase of a student's education. That also, the community-based nature of programming also definitely brings up questions about attendance. How are we taking attendance on students when they're maybe being provided instruction and support away from the school building? They're not in a classroom all day, every day. And so that can be really an individual decision. What is we kind of provide guidance to school districts on is making sure that they set up a structure that's consistent. So some transition teachers will take attendance at the beginning of the day, knowing that their students have individual schedules. And if they're there for their schedule, they're marked as present for the day. Some school districts choose to do it by class. So if a student's out on a work experience or in a community-based class, they might have a specific course that runs for that chunk of time, and someone is responsible for taking that attendance when those students are a part of that. And then lastly, a common question that we get in sort of the technical components is what learning standards should instruction be aligned to for students in this phase of education? The short answer is the same learning standards apply as previously in the previous years of education. So we can continue to be working on those same core learning standards in things like English language arts and math, etc. We also really encourage IEP teams to be looking at the Wisconsin Career Readiness Standards. Those are a K-12 bulk of standards. So they're a birth to life or a kindergarten to life set of standards, and they're really designed to help students be life ready, learning ready, and career ready. And they're meant to be integrated into any academic environment, including those community-based environments. And so I think those standards can be really helpful to teachers when they're designing instruction. In addition, the social emotional learning competencies are a great body of standards that I think definitely can be supportive of those skills that students are going to need to be great advocates, to be resilient, to have the coping mechanisms that they need to navigate their adult environments. So those are just two examples of standards that we reference, but there are lots of options out there, just as with traditional classroom instruction. And then, so for each of these sort of question areas and barrier areas, we did come up with a list of resources. We're not going to spend too much time going through the resources, but several of the things I mentioned, like the readiness standards and guidance on making those environmental code assessments, is all linked here on this slide.
Area we wanted to touch upon was working with families on program design. Another question that often comes up is, what do we do? We have families coming in saying that they need their student to stay until 21, or they may hear that from another source outside of school that they have that right to stay. And of course, that right, FAPE is open till 21 if the IEP team decides that it's necessary. But I guess we just wanted to pause here because we hear this question a lot, but I think often just a reminder that that question is rooted in fear and just the not knowing, that fear of the unknown. For so many years, school has been their safe place, and really for anyone entering any parent of a child that's getting ready to graduate and exit, it's a scary time. But then you add in a student with a disability and an IEP that has all these different supports and things that need to get aligned for graduation. It's really frightening and it's overwhelming and a lot. So that's why it's incredibly important to have these conversations earlier. And there's not an easy answer when we hear this question to say, well, just do this. The answer is more conversations and starting them earlier. The more that you can help families see what the options are and even help them visually see it. Maybe it's mapping it out and showing them in whatever manner works for that family visually, whether it's an actual schedule of the semester and of the week and saying first semester we're going to work on these goals, and second semester we're going to then add in this support, or whatever you can do to help the family see what that may look like, and just for them to know that there are options and things that can be done. So I think a lot of time that question comes out of that fear and just not knowing. That unknown is always so frightening. There might need to be more communication with the team, or just meeting. Again, that whole transition meeting kind of comes into place. And of course, when you're meeting and something comes up that there's going to perhaps be a change in placement, or something, a change to the IEP, you can always pause and come back as an IEP meeting. But I think it's just so beneficial to come together as a group and say, we all care deeply about this student. Let's brainstorm the best way possible to get these supports in place and flush out this schedule. Again, sometimes when you start with the idea week in mind and what that will look like, if you think about what would an ideal schedule look like for the student when they exit, and then build the steps backwards of how can we help support the student to get to that schedule. At what pieces can the school support? What, maybe there's other supports, and school may be an initiator of those supports to start out with, but then they may are going to fade back and other supports come in. The other thing just to really keep in mind with family engagement is that traditional versus non-traditional engagement. I'm going to hop over to the next slide. I cannot take credit for this slide, but it was really powerful and really resonated with me. WISPE, another grant partner that supports families and a great resource. We have their contacts on the next page. Has lots of resources for families to help support them, and also can be a contact for families as they go through this process. But they shared this in a presentation, and it just really resonated with me. Often we'll hear or we'll say, and I've said this too as a teacher, the family's disengaged. But are they disengaged, or are they unreached? Just thinking about, are we ensuring that we're getting information to families in a style that works for them? Um, are we bombarding them with letters mailed home in a written form and they're not strong at reading? Maybe, or maybe that's not even their language or their style. Um, really, as you work with students kind of on a person-centered approach, you need to do that with families as well. Get to know them and build a connection. What is the best way to meet? And the other thing too is just the scheduling considerations. Think about when we hold IEP meetings. We're doing that usually after school or before school. And I get it. We have a lot of people to ensure that we need to get at that meeting. But if you have a family that's not coming, and able to engage, to really pause and ask the family about that time. They may be really in an employment that they can't get a free from and to attend. The other thing to think about too is an accessible like location. Often school may not have been a positive experience for a family member. So maybe just coming into that school just brings on a lot of anxiety and fear. So consider having it in a different location. Let the family choose. Maybe it's at the public library or a coffee shop. It's hard to maybe ensure confidentiality, but let them be part of that decision of where you're holding it and when. And just really kind of thinking about, is this family really disengaged, or have I not done everything I can to ensure that I'm making things accessible for them? So I really liked that slide. Here are the contacts for some of that. WISPE has great resources to give to families, kind of talking through what an IEP is, what to expect, the transition time. There's also other, before age 18 is a great resource. They have action steps for families to kind of go through and plan out transition. But we put some more resources in on here. You can look through them. As you have time, we put the links there. So collaboration with transition partners is just another question area that we get. And just a lot of times it's, when do outside agencies come in? Or what if we're working with outside agencies and they don't want to be part of it, or they're saying that's the school's responsibility? So we kind of hear things like that. Um, and it does get messy. And this is again where folks around that IEP table faces change. There's going to be more outside agencies because collaboration is key in this time period. One of the things that I do want to point out is that sometimes there's each outside agency is different. They have different referral process and just different structures to how they operate. And I think at times I don't know if we're hearing this as much, but I guess just to kind of keep in check of that no family or child should hear, well, we're a pay of last resort. If we have to, we'll fund. But just to remember that being part of the conversation and around the table, there's so much more than just who's funding the supports. Just having folks that are going to be providing support to the student and the family when the student exits, be there to help brainstorm. Often they're going to bring other ideas, a different lens. They may know of other services and possibilities to do in the community that the school's not thinking of. It really involves everyone. And then again, the key is to be able to utilize this time for the school to help bridge those relationships and connections with people. So just being at that table for the family and student to get to know those services and those individual folks so that when they graduate, they know who they can go to. Again, I put this transition meetings, and I know I keep talking to it, but it seems to be gaining momentum with districts across the state as it's just been a strategy or a way for folks to come together. You think about the IEP meeting is usually, scheduled for an hour, and there's so much to go over in that 1 hour. It's a whirlwind for everybody. So it doesn't leave a lot of time to maybe really get into the nitty-gritty transition planning. So setting aside a time to just talk it through and everybody come together and brainstorm, share what they're seeing when working with the student, and keep adjusting that schedule as we need to. So, and again, think outside the box of transition partners. Maybe it's a next door neighbor that's providing respite support or become a mentor to the student. There's so many different folks that come into contact with the student during the day that sometimes we overlook that are key. And again, that transition action guide, I'm going to, Alicia's going to dive into that a little bit more, but here are some resources to that and the link to the transition action guide, as well as some information on and ideas of how to build those supports with outside agencies.
Yeah, thanks, Shelley. So we did want to spend a minute just referencing the transition action guide for those who might have less familiarity with it. So this is actually, I should reference, this is the youth transition action guide. There is an adult version that has a very similar name. But this guide is a joint guidance document written by DPI and some of our other transition partners at the Department of Health Services and the Department of Workforce Development, some of our healthcare partners and our behavioral health partners, et cetera, at the state level. And what this guide is really meant to do is operationalize that process that Shelley and I have been talking about, where all of these partners are coming to wrap around a student and support them in reaching those post-secondary goals that are developed, first in their post-secondary transition plan in their PTP. And this guide is really useful because it defines what each partner, what their role is in the process and what supports that they could provide. The resource is meant to educate all of those partners and then understand what they can expect from other partners in that process. The guide also includes a really helpful frequently asked questions section where we answer in writing questions like who funds what? How do we decide who provides a service when there's multiple partners involved in supporting a student? And so we have written guidance there. The last thing I'll mention is that your statewide competitive integrated employment work group is revising this guide this year. We know for sure we're going to add a role for school nurses, which Shelley mentioned before, as a key transition partner, especially for our students who have more complex medical needs and healthcare needs that they need to be thinking about in this phase of their education and as they prepare for adulthood. So if anyone has suggestions on questions that they feel like are missing from the guide or things that they'd like to see added, feel free to send those to us because we are in the process of making an update this year. And so lastly, I just wanted to spend a real quick minute. I'm noting the time and I want to make sure we have space to answer questions. But there are, even though we've described a lot of resources and strategies to make this process smooth, it is complex. And we get into situations where IEP teams can't agree or families disagree with a decision that a school has made about the transition services being provided to their student and beyond age 18. And so when those conflicts arise, some of those same strategies that we've been talking about throughout this presentation as best practices are definitely things that we recommend. Two that I'll highlight is just that all the partners are coming to the table with a yes attitude. This is something that myself and my colleagues at the state agencies talk about in our guidance and training, and that we all have limitations and structures in the way that we are providing service to people with disabilities. But if we're all coming to the table with a yes attitude and saying, this is the student's goal for employment, for example, and here's what school can offer to make sure that that student is prepared to reach that goal, and here's what DVR can offer, and here's what long-term care can offer. If we can come to the table with that attitude rather than saying, no, I'm the payee of last resort, or we don't provide those services yet, if we can flip that and come with that yes attitude, we're much more likely to help the student achieve their goals. And then lastly, I did want to mention that DPI has formal dispute resolution options when IEP teams can agree and or when a family maybe is struggling to doesn't agree with the decision that a school district has made. And those dispute resolution options are also available to anyone who's a part of the IEP process, not just families and students. Additionally, our other partners like DVR and long-term care also have specific resources if when teams come into a conflict or there's a dispute about a decision being made for a service. And then lastly, I think this is probably one of the most common questions we're answering these days in terms of beyond age 18 programming. And we're definitely making updates to our guidance and support to this part of it. But it really gets back to how do IEP teams make the decision of whether or not a student should stay past age 18? How are we making that decision? And again, some of those same strategies apply, making sure these conversations are not happening in May of senior year, that we're having this conversation early and often with families. We're having that family including future or current outside agency partners, making sure that they're a part of that process and understanding the students' needs and how they might fold into that beyond age 18 programming phase of education. We're grounding those conversations in the post-secondary goals for the student. And if this is their goal when they leave school, what skills, instructions, and supports do we need to backwards plan for to help the student get there when the end of their school career does come? We need to come back to that programming design regularly. Kids are kids, experiences and change plans all the time. Goals can change. And also, behaviors can change and health needs can change and skills can develop. And so it's important that we're not just deciding something at 18 and sticking to it for the next few years, that we're regularly coming back to that programming and making sure that it's best designed to support a student. And then lastly, just our final reminder that these decisions should not be set on a specific criteria or disability related need profile for accessing those services. We want to make sure that those decisions are individualized and happening at the IEP team level. We're not necessarily predetermining things for students and families based on sort of what their students' long-term goals are, what their profile looks like. And so just keeping that individualized nature at the heart of making these decisions will make sure that, you know, you're fulfilling your accountability as a school. And so I think we're going to move to our questions portion of the